Hey, it's Jeff Toister, your service culture guide. And today we're going to talk about contact center agent burnout. Now, I'm excited to talk about this. And why am I excited to talk about burnout? Because we're going to focus on preventing burnout. I've just completed a study that's identified 11 factors that make contact center agents more resilient. And I'm going to share some of those factors with you today. Now, we are going to do just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started, and then we'll jump right in. So, I have a discussion question for you as we're going through some housekeeping items. My question for you is why are you tuning in today? If you're watching this live, why did you sign up for this broadcast? If you're watching the recording, why are you still watching? What's interesting you about burnout? What do you want to know? I'm going to try to answer some of your questions during this broadcast. Now, as always, if you want more broadcasts like this, you could follow me on LinkedIn. I generally talk about something related to service culture once a month. And for this specific broadcast, I have just completed a study on agent burnout. And you can get that entire study for free by clicking on the link in this post. So I shared it. It's the first link. It's the very top. Let me share it with you real quick. It's toistersolutions.com/burnout. You can get the full report right there. So go there for that. But my question for you, let's come back to that. Why are you tuning in today? What do you want to know about agent burnout? So again, I want to welcome everybody for joining us today. Thanks for being part of this broadcast, whether you're joining live or you're watching the recording. I'm Jeff Toister. I'm your service culture guide. And today we're going to talk about preventing contact center agent burnout. So I'm really excited about this topic because there's so much information about burnout and how it's such a big problem. But I don't think there's enough information about what we can do about it or why some agents are more likely to burn out than others. And that's what I want to share with you today. So if we jump right in, I'm going to define burnout for you. I'll tell you a little bit about the study. I'm going to share with you the top 3 things that I found make agents more resilient. And I'm going to share with you one surprise that I did not expect when I did this study. And it's not in my report. So we're going to dive in a little bit deeper into that surprise in just a moment. So thank you all for tuning in. Again, if you want to share, why are you tuning in today? But let's get started. So what is burnout? Let's go to a definition. This is not my definition. It's from the American Psychological Association. And their definition, I think, makes a lot of sense. It's physical, emotional, or mental exhaustion that's accompanied by a decreased motivation, lowered performance, and negative attitudes towards yourself and towards others. All that can be bad in a customer service environment. And we know from research that generally speaking, burnout is caused by a feeling that you don't have control. It's caused by a feeling that maybe your work doesn't matter or that it's not appreciated in some way. So that information is out there. It's fairly well researched, but I wanted to dive specifically into the contact center and find out, well, what makes contact center agents at risk of burnout? Because we're hearing so much about this topic. So I'm going to share that with you. But again, I'll invite you, if you're tuning in today, to share with me, why are you tuning in? What are you excited to learn about? What do you hope to gain? I'm going to answer some of your questions during this live broadcast. And if you're watching this as a recording, you can still share questions or your reason for watching this. And I'll check in periodically and see if I can respond. Okay, so what is burnout? Now let's talk about what's happening in the contact center. I did a study. 951 agents completed the full survey. It included a burnout self-assessment, and that identified how likely they are to be facing burnout or how at risk the agent is. And then the second element looked at different aspects of their work environment. And the goal was to try to connect burnout risk with what type of work they're doing or what their work environment is like. Let me share with you the overall results. Overall, we found that burnout is happening in the contact center. This is really no surprise. 31% of agents are at risk of burnout. 28% are at a severe risk of burnout. So if you put those two groups together, 59% of contact center agents are at risk of burnout. Now, there's some good news. For one, 41% not really at risk. They're doing okay. And here's some, I think, unexpected good news. I did the same study in 2016. And in 2016, I found that 74% of contact center agents were at risk of burnout. Now that's down to 59. Still not great. And it varies widely from company to company, contact center to contact center. But we've made some progress. So let's celebrate that. Now, why did we make progress? I don't know. We'll have to dive into that. Maybe you've got a theory on why it's getting better, even though it's such a big issue even today. But that's a good thing that we're making progress. We're getting better. We're improving our agents' resilience to burnout. And I want to share with you some ways that you can do even better. What are some things you can proactively do to prevent burnout in your contact center? That's what we're going to talk about today. So the very first thing that I found, which is not surprising, but it's great to have some data to go with this, is empowerment. If we empower our agents, they are less likely to be at risk of burnout. And let me share with you what that looks like. One of the questions on the survey was, do you feel empowered to help customers with most of their needs? And you can see how the different groups answered a little differently. 93% of agents who are not at risk of burnout said, yes, I feel empowered most of the time. But for the agents who are at risk of burnout, that number went down to 84%, and the severe risk group was at 72%. Now, a couple things to note about this. One is clearly these results show us that empowerment is a big factor. In fact, this was the factor with the biggest difference between the not at risk group and the severe risk group. So empowerment's good. And that makes sense because part of what causes burnout is a feeling that I'm losing control. But we also have to be careful here because there's no single factor that says this is the absolute determining factor for burnout. Notice that the 72% of severe risk agents still said, yeah, I feel empowered, which means there's probably something else that's driving their feeling of burnout. In fact, in many cases, what the data showed was it might be a combination of factors. And the more risk factors you pile on, the more at risk you're going to be. So there's no one magic factor that says, hey, if you're empowered, for example, definitely no chance of burnout. It's really more of a combination of things. So when we look at that, and we're going to look specifically at burnout, one of the things I want to get into here is what is empowerment? Because empowerment, I think for too long, we've looked at maybe the wrong way. I think traditionally empowerment, we've thought of as letting agents do whatever they want, just giving them unlimited authority. And my research into customer-focused organizations shows something a little bit different. Customer-focused organizations define empowerment as enabling agents to do good work. And that really includes a few things. One, the resources you need to do your job. So this includes the systems, the tools. If I work for a company that sells products online, it might be the inventory. Or if I'm helping people with technical issues, it might be the ability to get into that product or that software and really figure out what's going wrong. So those resources are essential. And they have nothing to do with authority. It's really, did I give you what you need to be able to help your customers? The second element of empowerment is best practices. I got a note from a contact center agent just the other day who said that it's frustrating trying to keep up with all the new procedures and all the new products and all the new ways to solve problems. And sometimes when they really know how to do something, it feels great. Hey, I can help a customer right away. But other times they feel like I don't have the answer, and that's a struggle. I can't even find the answer, and I don't feel great. My customer doesn't feel great. So having best practices that are readily available that you can use to help your customers is another part of empowerment. And then finally, there is authority, which is really not about doing whatever you want, but making exceptions to the best practice or making exceptions to the policy when it's warranted. In other words, using your best judgment given the situation. So we find that empowerment is the top factor that can help agents become more resilient, but it's not the only factor. So let's dive into a few other factors as well. So I can share with you today, I said I'm going to share the top three. Again, you can get just a couple of reminders. You can get the full report on my website, toistersolutions.com/burnout. And if you have specific questions about some of the things I'm sharing with you today, then ask them as a comment, and I will respond to them either live or afterwards. I'll check in on your comments and respond to your questions there. Okay, so number one was empowerment. That was the top one. Number two, risk factor, but also something that makes our agents more resilient is pay, compensation. So let's dive into this one a little bit. Here was the question. Are you paid fairly for the work you do? And look at this. The agents who are not at risk of burnout, 77% said, yeah, I'm paid fairly. And what does that mean? Well, it's up to the agent to decide what they think is fair. And we're not saying, are you paid lavishly? We're just saying, are you paid fairly? And the not at risk group said 77% said yes. The severe risk group, 59% of them said yes, which means 41% did not feel like they're paid fairly. Now, here's a couple of things I want to point out. You might notice something a little odd here. The at-risk group is even lower than the severe risk group. Now, how can this be? A couple of explanations we don't know for sure. One is that given the number of agents who participated, so there's 951 that actually completed the entire process. Interestingly, 1,200 started the survey and about 25% dropped out. So that tells us something too, right? Maybe they're the people who are most burned out. I don't even have time for this survey. So we don't know. But with a sample size of 951, 53%, 59%, those are actually pretty similar. They're close enough that I wouldn't look at that as statistically as a big gap. But maybe there is. Maybe if we surveyed another 1,000 agents, maybe we'd find that gap holds true. And so what does that tell us? Well, we might have to make some guesses, or we might have to dive in a little bit deeper into what fair pay means and how it connects with some of those other factors. It could be that for the at-risk group, they don't feel that they're paid fairly, but they feel that their company is a company they enjoy working for. And so they're willing to overlook less compensation for a better environment. And I did see some of those responses in this study, but some of those are guesses. What we do know is pay, generally speaking, takes some of the burnout risk off the table. And it doesn't mean that we're overcompensating people. It just means that we're paying them fairly, paying them at a level where they feel, you know what, pay is not what I worry about when I go to work every day. I can focus on providing outstanding customer service. And if we want to tie this into other research, there's a lot of research on what motivates people. And we often think that it's pay is the motivator. And it turns out there's not. It's not really the motivator for outstanding customer service. What it is, though, is it's a hygiene factor. In other words, if I'm worried about how much I get paid every day, then that's the thing that's top of mind, and that might interfere with my ability to focus on my job. On the other hand, if I think I'm paid okay, it's not so bad, then I can go to work and I think about other things. And you think about, there's some companies maybe you've heard of, like Costco, Trader Joe's, In-N-Out Burger. I know these are not contact centers, but these are companies that don't have big margins. They're known for outstanding customer service, and they also pay their employees a very high wage. And when you pay your employees a higher wage, you tend to be able to expect more from them. And you have less of a risk of burnout. But that's not the only reason people burn out is pay or not pay. It's just one of those risk factors. And one of the things I suggest that you can do is just take that off the table by evaluating where you're paying your agents now and comparing it to the market for available jobs. Now, what do I mean by this? I did this exercise with a client, and one of the things they found was that not just other contact centers, but where else would a contact center agent go to work? And they found, or they realized, that they were paying their agents at the very bottom of the pay scale. In other words, the agents who were not leaving were people who probably felt trapped. And the really good agents were getting job offers from other places and they were leaving. They were able to improve things considerably just by moving people up to the midpoint of the pay scale. Forget top of the line, just the midpoint changed dramatically who they could recruit and how well they could retain their employees. So do your own homework on this one. And it's important to know, are you paying your employees fairly? And do they feel like they're getting adequate compensation? There's a lot of data out there. There's sites like salary.com and other places where you can benchmark what you're paying against the market. And you could probably hear the more your employees are grumbling about pay, the more it might be a factor. But again, this is not the only factor. In fact, what we're finding is a lot of companies, because they have such a bad culture and such a bad environment, they have to overpay to attract and retain talent. So we can't look at pay alone as the only factor. It's just one thing. I said I was going to share 3 with you today. So let's go to this third one, which is leadership. This is you, the boss. And as a boss, you have the biggest impact on empowerment, or I should say on burnout and burnout resiliency. Now, there were a lot of questions I asked about bosses. And across the board, the boss related questions, if I feel like I have a good boss, my resilience to burnout goes way up. But there was one in particular I want to share with you. And this is supportive. Is your boss generally supportive? And check this out. The group that is not at risk of burnout, 94% said yes. Now, this was tied with one other factor, which is, do you believe your company is customer focused? 94% of those agents said who are not at risk also said yes. So this idea of being customer focused is very important. You can see that in empowerment and in pay, and even having a supportive boss, I think is part of a culture where we're customer focused. But for this particular question, look at the drop off. The at-risk group said only 84% said, yeah, my boss is supportive. And 77% in the severe risk group said, yes, my boss is supportive. There are a couple of things I think we could take away from this. One is, again, there is no one magic cure. Notice with the severe risk group, 77% still said, yeah, I've got a supportive boss. In fact, I saw one organization, I wasn't able to tell every agent that participated, but I know, or I was aware of a few organizations specifically that had their agents take part. And the risk of burnout was really high. But at the same time, many of the agents say, yeah, I love my boss. My boss is great, but I don't feel empowered. I'm not well paid. And our staffing is terrible. So there were other factors that contributed to burnout. So I would look at it as not just one thing, but maybe a mix of things. But this really jumped out at me. So you might have some observations. What makes a boss supportive? And notice I didn't ask that question, or I didn't define that. I left that up to the agent. Excuse me. I left that up to the agent to define, what do you think is supportive? But I think we could probably guess on a few things. And if you have some ideas of what makes a boss more supportive, let's share those as a comment for everybody else, because I'd love to know what you think about it. For me, generally speaking, when I've talked to agents, they feel their boss is supportive if their boss will listen to them, if their boss is accessible, if they feel that generally their boss is there to help them do great work and utilize their talents. So those are some in general things, but maybe you have some additional ideas. What do you think makes a boss more supportive? Okay, so I've highlighted three, I would say the top three from the study. And again, if you want the full report, you can see all 11 factors that make our agents more resilient to burnout. Go to this website, toistersolutions.com/burnout. The very first comment in this post is a link to that study. So you can go there too. But I want to share with you something that's not in the report, something that, frankly, I was surprised about and was something I was not expecting. So here's the deal. One of the questions I looked at was whether or not working from home versus working on site made a difference. And it turns out there's no difference. Agents who work from home are not any more at risk or not any more resilient than agents who work on site. And I know some of you out there are on team on site. You want your agents on site and you think it's vital and super important. Well, this study shows that your agents aren't any more likely to face burnout. But if you're on team remote, guess what? This study's not helping you either, because again, the burnout risk is pretty much the same between remote and on site. So that's in the report. That's not really a factor. But there's something that was really interesting when I took a deeper dive. And I think this is something we should be paying attention to. And team on site, you're not going to like this. So when we look at burnout, no difference. But one of the arguments, if you remember, for being on site are things like you can communicate a little bit better. But take a look at this. One of the questions that I drill down into across all agents, so regardless of burnout risk level, because we found those are pretty equal. But one of the questions was, do you receive regular feedback from your boss? Remote agents, 80% said yes, and only 67% of on-site agents agreed, which means 33% of on-site agents are saying, even though we work in the same space, I don't have a conversation with my boss on a regular basis. That blew my mind. Isn't the whole idea that we're working together in the same space? Isn't that the argument for making our agents come on site? Well, this shoots that argument down and says, well, actually, if they were off site, we're going to talk to each other even more. And I've talked to managers and agents, and I said, well, how do you explain this? And what remote managers have told me is, well, one of the things that helps is when your agents are remote, you are a little bit more deliberate and intentional about how you approach your conversations. And you probably do a better job of making sure everything is in writing. So that was one of the things that really jumped out at me. And it was really super surprising that remote agents are getting more feedback. But it's not just there. There's more that I found out. Here's another question. Along maybe the feedback line, are customers given a survey where they're asked to rate your service? 67% of remote agents said yes, but only 56% of on-site agents said yes. So I think this maybe backs up what that manager was telling me, which is, we're just more deliberate when people are remote. We need better tools for capturing and sharing and organizing feedback. And maybe that's why these organizations with remote agents are more likely to be doing surveys, or at least making their agents aware of those surveys. For the people who said no to this, it could be that there's no survey, or it could be that the agents aren't told about the survey. And so they would think, no, that's not happening. Either way, there's no feedback that's coming along. So that could be it. Okay, here's some more things. Whoa, what happened? I just lost you. The broadcast totally blanked out. We're back. I hope you're back with me. Wow, that was an interesting thing. Okay, where are we here? I hope you're still with me. Got to get to this one. Let's see. Oh, here we are. Does your boss set a positive example? I hope you're coming back to me now. And it was just on my end. My presentation software completely crashed, and now we're back. So I hope we're back. We'll see. I'll find out in a moment. So here was the thing that really jumped out at me. Another thing about remote versus on-site agents. One of the questions was, does your boss set a positive example? In other words, is your boss a good role model? 86% of remote agents said, yeah, but only 77% of on-site agents said the same thing. And that really shocked me too. What do you mean? On-site agents isn't your boss supposed to be there, like right in the same spot to set a great example? But again, I dove into this and I started talking to agents, and I started thinking about my own experiences. And I want you to think, if you're a boss and you work on site, I want you to think if you've ever done any of these things. Have you ever hovered over an agent while they're on a call? I mean, it's because you want to talk to them as soon as they're done, but the effect is like you're just kind of hovering over them and making them nervous, and it's interrupting with their focus. Have you ever tried to have a conversation with them, like an important conversation in between contacts versus saying, hey, why don't you get out of the queue for a moment? Let's go talk and go over this report or whatever the issue is. Again, that's very distracting for the agent. Doesn't send a great example. And here's another one. Have you ever freaked out about the queue? Oh, there's so many contacts. We got so many emails. But freaking out doesn't help the agent feel better or concentrate more. But I've seen on-site agents do all of those things, and they're probably more likely to do those types of things than a manager who's managing more of a remote team. Just a theory, just from some of the feedback I've gained and from the things I've observed. So we don't know. Maybe you have some ideas, and if you do, please share them. But it's very interesting that generally speaking, remote agents are saying, you know, I've got a pretty good boss. And here's this last one, going back to the compensation thing. Are you paid fairly for the work you do? Remote agents, 67% said yes. On-site agents, it's closer, but 60% said yes, which means 40% said no, not really. So when you look at all of those things together, it gives us some insight, I think, on how we've gotten better. Generally, we've gotten better at managing a remote team and remote agents. And if you're still committed to team on-site, you're like, we have to have them on-site. That's okay. And every situation is a little bit different. But I would encourage you to look at this data and see, are there some gaps that you're not aware of? In other words, if you think, wow, as a boss, having people on site, I can talk to them more, but maybe your agents are saying, you know, we don't talk enough. It was better when we were off site because we had more regular conversations. I don't know, but it's something certainly worth looking into. All right, we've got just a few minutes left of the live broadcast. I want to wrap things up. I want to get to your questions. So if you have any questions about the burnout study or any of the data I shared with you today, please share them as a comment. If you're watching this as on the replay, you could still share a question in the comment field, and I'll try to respond to those. If you shared a question or a comment earlier, unfortunately, when my system crashed, all of your comments disappeared, but they're still on LinkedIn. So as soon as I'm done with the broadcast, I can go back into LinkedIn. I can find your questions. I can find your comments, and I'll respond to you there. Also wanted to make sure you can get this burnout report. So one last time, if you want to see all 11 factors that help our agents be more resilient to burnout, go to toistersolutions.com/burnout. You could download the full report, see all 11 factors, and I've included some resources to help you with each of those. For example, you'll get a link to my empowerment guide so you can dive even deeper into those topics. So I really want to thank you for being part of this broadcast today. I appreciate your patience as I had a technical issue on my end. Hopefully that wasn't a huge interruption. And I hope you gain something that can help your agents be more resilient to burnout. Or if you're an agent yourself, help you be more resilient to burnout. And that's one last resource. I put it as a comment. It's probably the 4th or 5th comment down if you sort through the post or from the beginning. So maybe you have to go to the oldest and then work your way up. But there's a link to a video on preventing a customer service burnout. And you do have to have access to LinkedIn Learning to be able to watch this video, but I know many of you do have LinkedIn Learning access. So it's one additional resource to help you gain some ideas for preventing burnout or making your agents more resilient to burnout. All right. Thank you all for taking a moment out of your day to be with me. I'm going to end the broadcast, but I'm going to dive into your questions and your comments, and I will join you online in just a moment. And until that doesn't make any sense. Until the next broadcast, I hope you stay resilient to burnout as well. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.